The first thing Elena Rossi noticed about the Bianchi estate was the silence. Not the soft, expectant hush of a wedding morning, but the dense, pressurized quiet of a place where people had learned to breathe carefully. The marble floors gleamed under chandeliers that cost more than her entire apartment building, and the air smelled of gardenias and old money, and something metallic underneath, like a blade freshly wiped clean. She adjusted the strap of her makeup case on her shoulder, the weight of it familiar and grounding, and followed the stone-faced housekeeper down a corridor lined with portraits of dead men in expensive suits. Her shoes made a soft sound on the marble. The housekeepers made none at all. Elena was used to being the loudest thing in a room without saying a word. Her hips brushed door frames. Her thighs whispered together when she walked. Her presence took up space that certain people resented her for occupying. She had learned, over 29 years, to read the exact moment when someone's gaze flicked from her face to her body and back again. The micro-expression of surprise, or distaste, or pity that flashed across their features before they smoothed it away. She could read faces the way musicians read scores. Every note and rest and accidental telling a story the person didn't know they were performing. It was a skill she had never named aloud. A party trick, her mother had called it, when Elena was 12, and had asked why Aunt Maria's smile never reached her eyes when she talked about her husband. A curse, Elena had thought later, when she couldn't unsee the lies people wore like makeup. Now it was just the way she moved through the world, cataloging the tiny betrayals of muscle and breath that revealed what words tried to hide. The housekeeper's tight jaw said she was afraid. The guard at the end of the corridor, his shoulders braced, and his gaze flicking to every doorway, said he was expecting violence. The whole estate hummed with tension, a string tuned too high and waiting to snap. "The bride is in the East Suite," the housekeeper said, stopping before a set of double doors carved with roses and thorns. "She does not like to be kept waiting." "Neither do I," Elena said, and the housekeeper blinked, as if furniture had spoken. Elena smiled, a small, private curve of her lips, and pushed open the doors. The bridal suite was chaos, dressed in silk, bolts of fabric draped over every surface, trays of jewelry glittering under the vanity lights, and at the center of it all, like a storm given human form, stood Alessia Bianchi. She was beautiful, in the way a stiletto is beautiful, sleek, sharp, designed to wound. Her dark hair fell in perfect waves, over shoulders that had never carried anything heavier than a grievance, and her eyes, a pale, unsettling green, fixed on Elena with the immediate, dismissive assessment of someone who had already decided she was unworthy. "You're the makeup artist," Alessia said. It was not a question. Her gaze traveled from Elena's face down to her hips, her thick thighs, the soft curve of her belly visible even under her professional black tunic, and her upper lip curled. "They told me you were the best. They didn't mention you were so substantial." Elena set her case down on the vanity with a click that was louder than she intended. "The best comes in all sizes, Miss Bianchi." "It's Mrs. Bianchi in approximately 4 hours," Alessia said, turning back to the mirror. "Or rather, it will be, and I expect perfection. My husband-to-be has very particular standards. He notices everything." She said it like a warning, or perhaps a threat, her eyes meeting Elena's in the glass. "He does not tolerate disappointment." Elena said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was a shield, that words spent defending her body were words wasted. She unzipped her case and began laying out her brushes, her palettes, her creams and powders, and the tiny vials of serum she mixed herself, the ones that made skin glow, like it was lit from within. Her hands were steady, They always were. The tremor lived deeper, in the place behind her ribs where she stored every insult she had ever swallowed, and she did not let it reach her fingers. Alessia settled into the chair before the mirror, tilting her chin up, as if she were already posing for photographs. I want the look to be timeless, elegant, nothing that photographs too heavy, but enough coverage that I don't look tired. I've barely slept all week. The preparations have been exhausting. She waved a hand, a diamond bracelet catching the light. You wouldn't understand. Planning a wedding of this scale. The families involved. The expectations. I've done weddings before, Elena said, and began her work. She started with the skin, as she always did, cleansing and toning, and applying the first layer of moisture. Her touch was gentle, impersonal, the touch of a professional who had touched 1,000 faces and would touch 1,000 more. But as her fingers moved over Alessia's temples, her cheekbones, the delicate skin beneath her eyes, she was reading, the tension in the jaw, the slight asymmetry of the smile. Alessia offered her reflection, the way her pupils dilated when she talked about her fiancé, not with desire, but with something sharper, hungrier. Elena had seen that look before, on the faces of women who viewed their partners as stepping stones, as acquisitions, as means to an end. You're very quiet, Alessia said, her eyes tracking Elena's movements in the mirror. Most people try to make conversation, flatter me, tell me how beautiful I am, how lucky I am, how they've never seen a more perfect bride. You're paying me to make you look beautiful, Elena said, blending foundation along the jawline with small, precise strokes. Not to tell you things you already know. Alessia laughed, a short, surprised sound that was almost genuine. I like that. Honesty. It's so rare in this world. Everyone lies, you know. Everyone wants something. My Matteo. He thinks he's so clever, so untouchable, but even he can't see what's right in front of him. She said his name with a strange proprietary emphasis, the way someone might say my car or my investment. He trusts too easily. It's his greatest weakness. Elena's brush paused for a fraction of a second, a hesitation so brief that Alessia didn't notice. But Elena's mind had caught on the word weakness, on the tiny, satisfied smile that had flickered at the corner of Alessia's mouth. She filed it away and continued her work. The morning wore on. Outside the windows, the estate grounds were being transformed into a wedding venue, workers stringing fairy lights through the olive trees and arranging rows of white chairs on the lawn. Elena could hear the distant murmur of voices, the clink of glassware, the occasional sharp command in Italian. The air in the bridal suite grew warmer as the sun climbed, and the scent of Alessia's perfume, something heavy and floral, with an undertone of spice, settled over everything like a shroud. At some point, a young woman slipped into the room, so quietly that Elena almost didn't notice her. She was small and dark-haired, with nervous hands, and the kind of uniform that marked her as junior staff. A hairstylist, Elena guessed, from the combs tucked into her apron pocket, and the way her eyes went immediately to Alessia's hair. She hovered near the door, clearly waiting for permission to approach. That's just Gia, Alessia said, catching Elena's glance in the mirror. She's doing my hair. Eventually. When I'm ready. Gia, come here. Look at this. She gestured at her own reflection, at the half-finished makeup Elena had applied. Tell me honestly, does this look like the work of the best makeup artist in the city? Gia's eyes darted to Elena, then back to Alessia. Her face was an open book of anxiety. It looks beautiful, Miss Bianchi. Of course you'd say that. You're terrified of me. Alessia sighed, as if the cowardice of others was a great burden she had to bear. Fine, start on the updo. But be careful. If you pull a single hair, I'll have you removed. Gia nodded, and moved behind the chair, her hands trembling slightly as she began to section Alessia's hair. Elena caught her eye in the mirror and offered the smallest of smiles, the kind of solidarity that passed between women who served women like Alessia. Gia's shoulders relaxed a fraction. For a while, the room was quiet, except for the soft sounds of brushes and combs and the distant wedding preparations. Elena worked on Alessia's eyes, blending a subtle smoky shadow that made the pale green of her irises look almost luminous. She was good at this. She had always been good at this, at finding the beauty in faces that did not belong to kind people, at making monsters look like angels. It was a living. It paid her rent and kept her small apartment warm and allowed her to buy the expensive serums she used on her own skin, the ones that kept her soft and glowing in a world that wanted her to shrink. And then, Alessia's phone rang. The sound was sharp, insistent, a classical ringtone that cut through the quiet like a blade. Alessia's expression shifted instantly. The bored, imperious mask replaced by something alert and focused. She snatched the phone from the vanity and glanced at the screen, and for just a moment, her face went very still. It was the stillness of a predator who has spotted prey, a stillness that made the hair on the back of Elena's neck stand up. "I need to take this," Alessia said, already rising from the chair. "Both of you, out, now." Gia immediately stepped back, her hands still full of hairpins. Elena set down her brush more slowly, her eyes tracking Alessia's face, reading the micro-expressions that flickered across it like lightning. Excitement, anticipation, and something else, something darker, that made Elena's stomach clench. "The makeup isn't finished," Elena said. "It can wait. This can't. Go wait in the hallway. I'll call you when I'm done." Alessia was already moving toward the adjoining bathroom, the phone pressed to her chest like a secret. "And don't listen at the door. I'll know if you do." Elena gathered her brushes and followed Gia into the corridor. The door swung shut behind them with a soft, final click. Gia leaned against the wall and let out a shaky breath. "She's terrifying," Gia whispered. "I've been doing hair for 3 years, and I've never been so scared of a bride. And I did the Carlucci wedding last spring. You know, the one where the groom's mother threw a champagne flute at the florist." "I heard about that," Elena said. She was only half listening. Her attention was still on the door, on the muffled sound of Alessia's voice rising and falling behind it. The bathroom was adjacent to the suite, not soundproofed, and if she stood very still and held her breath, she could almost make out the words. She shouldn't listen. She knew she shouldn't listen. Eavesdropping on a Mafia bride's private phone call was the kind of stupidity that got people killed, or worse, disappeared. Elena had spent her whole life learning to be invisible, to take up less space, to not make waves. It was survival. It was how women like her, curvy, overlooked, underestimated, made it through a world that wanted them silent. But Alessia's face, in that moment before she'd taken the call, had shown her something Elena couldn't ignore. It was the expression of someone who was about to do something terrible and was looking forward to it. "I need to use the restroom," Elena said to Gia. "There's probably one down the hall. I'll be right back." Gia nodded, already pulling out her phone to scroll through something, and Elena walked down the corridor with the unhurried pace of someone who had every right to be there. She passed the guards, who barely glanced at her. She was just the makeup artist, just the fat girl with the brush case, not a threat, never a threat, and turned a corner into a small alcove near the suite service entrance. The wall here was thinner. She could hear Alessia's voice clearly now, sharp and impatient. "I told you not to call me today. It's the wedding. There are people everywhere." A pause. "No, he doesn't suspect anything. He's too busy playing the doting groom. God, he's so predictable. He actually thinks I love him. A laugh, cold and brittle as ice. Yes, everything is in place. The ceremony is at 4. The reception will run until at least midnight. By the time everyone's drunk and stupid, Marco's men will be in position. Elena's blood went cold. Marco Bianchi, the boss's younger brother, the one who had been passed over for succession, who had spent the last 5 years in a simmering resentment that everyone in the family pretended not to notice. Elena knew the name because she read the papers, because she paid attention, because her survival depended on knowing who held power and who wanted it. The poison is already in the house, Alessia continued, her voice dropping lower, more intimate. It's slow acting, tasteless. By the time he feels the symptoms, he'll think it's just too much champagne. And by the time anyone realizes what's happening, Marco will have secured the estate, and I'll be the grieving widow. Very tragic, very sympathetic, and very, very rich. Another pause. No, the makeup artist is here. Some fat cow they hired to make me look presentable. She's nobody. She doesn't know anything. And even if she did, who would believe her? Elena pressed her hand against the wall to steady herself. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, in her temples, in the tips of her fingers. The poison is already in the house. The words echoed in her skull, a nightmare-given voice. She had to do something. She had to warn someone. But who? The guards? They might be Marco's men. The housekeeper? Too afraid. The boss himself? She had no way to reach him. No proof except her own word. And Alessia was right. Who would believe the fat makeup artist over the beautiful bride? She needed proof. She needed a recording. Her phone was in her pocket. She pulled it out with trembling fingers, swiped to the voice recorder app, and pressed record. Alessia's voice continued, muffled but clear enough. A litany of betrayal and murder, and cold, calculated greed. The best part is, Matteo actually thanked me this morning. Thanked me for agreeing to marry him, for making him so happy. He said I was the best thing that ever happened to him. Alessia laughed again, and the sound was genuinely delighted, the laugh of someone who was enjoying a private joke. He's going to die thinking I loved him, and Marco will finally have what he deserves. The family will be ours. Finally. Elena recorded every word. Her hand was steady now, steadier than it had been all morning. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overlaid with something else, something hot and fierce and unfamiliar. Anger. She had spent her whole life being dismissed, being underestimated, being told in 1,000 small ways that she didn't matter. And now, a woman who had called her a fat cow was planning to murder her husband on his wedding day, and she thought she would get away with it, because no one would believe the nobody. Elena stopped the recording and slipped the phone back into her pocket. She took a breath, then another, forcing her face into its usual placid, professional mask. She walked back down the corridor to where Gia was still waiting, still scrolling, still oblivious. "Everything okay?" Gia asked, looking up. "Fine," Elena said. "Just nerves. Big day." "Tell me about it." Gia shook her head. "I can't wait for this to be over." "Me neither," Elena said, and meant it more than Gia could possibly know. The door to the bridal suite opened, and Alessia emerged, her phone now tucked away, her expression once again the cool, imperious mask of the perfect bride. "You can come back in now, and hurry up. I have a wedding to get to." Elena followed her back into the suite, her mind racing. She had the recording, she had the proof, but she still had no way to get it to Don Matteo Bianchi, the man whose life depended on a woman he had never met, a woman his bride had dismissed as nobody. She needed a plan. She needed an opportunity, and she needed to stay alive long enough to use both. The next hour was the longest of Elena's life. She finished Alessia's makeup with the same steady hands she had always had, blending and highlighting and perfecting, while her mind ran through scenarios and escape routes and the 1,000 ways this could go wrong. Alessia chattered about the flowers, the guests, the honeymoon she would never take, and Elena nodded and murmured and applied the final touches to a face that was beautiful and monstrous in equal measure. Gia finished the updo, a cascade of dark curls pinned with pearls, and stepped back with visible relief. Alessia examined herself in the mirror, turning her head from side to side, and for the first time all morning, she smiled with something approaching genuine satisfaction. "Perfect," she said. "I look like a queen." "You look like a bride," Elena said, and the words tasted like ash. Alessia stood, smoothing down the front of her robe. "The ceremony starts in an hour. I need to get into my dress. You're both dismissed. Payment will be sent to your agencies." She waved a hand, already dismissing them, already moving toward the wardrobe where her wedding gown hung in its protective bag. "You can see yourselves out." Elena began packing her brushes, her movements slow and deliberate. She needed more time. She needed a way to warn the boss before the ceremony, before the poison could be administered, before Alessia and Marco's plan could unfold. And then her eyes fell on the small, elegant notepad on the vanity, the one Alessia had used to write down her makeup preferences earlier. A pen lay beside it. An idea sparked. "Miss Bianchi," Elena said, and Alessia turned, impatient. "Before I go, there's one more thing, a final touch, for luck." Alessia's eyes narrowed. "What kind of touch?" "It's an old tradition," Elena lied smoothly. "From my grandmother. A tiny mark, hidden under the makeup, that brings good fortune to the marriage. Most brides don't even know it's there, but it's said to guarantee a long and happy union." She smiled, the warm, reassuring smile of a professional who had done this 100 times. "I've done it for all my brides. They've all thanked me later." Alessia hesitated, her suspicion warring with her superstition. The Mafia was a world of rituals and omens, of traditions that went back generations. Even a woman like Alessia, cold and calculating as she was, might not want to risk bad luck on her wedding day. "Fine," she said. "Make it quick." Elena stepped forward, her heart hammering. She picked up a fine-tipped brush and dipped it in a pale, flesh-toned concealer. With one hand, she tilted Alessia's chin up, and with the other, she began to paint a tiny, invisible mark on the underside of her jaw, just below the ear. But as she worked, her other hand moved to the notepad on the vanity, and with the practiced dexterity of someone who had spent years doing delicate work, she tore off a corner of the paper and wrote 4 words, in the tiniest script she could manage. Poison. Marco. Recording. Trust. She folded the paper into a square no bigger than her thumbnail, and in the same motion as she finished the invisible mark, she pressed the tiny note into the concealer she had just applied, sealing it against Alessia's skin. The bride felt nothing, saw nothing. The note was hidden, a secret message written on the body of the traitor herself. "There," Elena said, stepping back. "All done. May your marriage be everything you deserve." Alessia smiled, a sharp, satisfied smile. "Oh, it will be." Elena packed her case and left the suite without looking back. Gia was already gone, probably fleeing the estate as fast as her legs could carry her. The corridor was empty, the guards still at their posts, the house still humming with the quiet, pressurized tension of a place waiting for something to happen. Elena walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing on the marble, and tried to think. She had planted the note, but would anyone find it? Would anyone understand it? The boss would be close to the bride during the ceremony. He might touch her face, her jaw, the spot where Elena had hidden the message. He might feel the tiny bump of the paper under the concealer. He might investigate, or he might not. It was a desperate, fragile plan, balanced on hope and luck, and the attention of a man she had never met. She needed a backup. She needed to get the recording to someone who would act on it. She was almost at the front door when she heard the voice. "Miss Rossi." She turned. A man was standing in the doorway of a side room, a man she hadn't noticed before. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair silvered at the temples, and eyes the color of aged whiskey. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, and an expression that was utterly unreadable. But Elena didn't need to read his expression. She could read everything else. The way he stood, balanced and ready. The way his hand rested near his pocket, where a weapon was almost certainly concealed. The way his gaze moved over her face, with an intensity that felt like being X-rayed. This was Don Matteo Bianchi, the boss, the target, the man who was supposed to die tonight. "Sir," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt, "you did my fiancé's makeup." It wasn't a question. His voice was low, rough, the voice of a man who had smoked too much and slept too little, and trusted no one. She looked pleased. "That's rare." "I'm good at my job," Elena said. "I'm sure you are." He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of him. Sandalwood and leather and something sharper, like whiskey or danger. "But that's not why I stopped you. I stopped you because you have the look of a woman who is carrying something heavy, and I've learned to pay attention to that look." Elena's heart stuttered. He was observant, dangerously observant. She had spent her whole life reading faces, and now she was being read by a man whose survival depended on the same skill. "Weddings are heavy," she said. "A lot of expectations." "Yes," he said, and his eyes never left her face. "They are. Especially this one." He paused, and something flickered in his expression. Something she couldn't quite name. "You're trembling." She looked down at her hands. They were, in fact, trembling. The tremor had finally escaped the place behind her ribs and reached her fingers. She curled them into fists. "Low blood sugar," she said. "I haven't eaten today." "Liar," he said, but there was no malice in it. Just a quiet, almost gentle certainty. "You're a terrible liar, Miss Rossi. Your face tells the truth, even when your mouth doesn't. It's refreshing, actually. Everyone in this house lies to me. Everyone except, apparently, the makeup artist." Elena swallowed. This was the moment. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for. The chance to tell him everything, to play the recording, to save his life. But the words stuck in her throat. What if he didn't believe her? What if he thought she was part of the plot? What if he was already poisoned, already dying, and she was just a loose end to be tied up? "I should go," she said. "My work here is done." "Is it?" He tilted his head, studying her. "I don't think it is. I think you have something to tell me, and I think you're afraid to say it, which means it's either very dangerous or very important, possibly both." She looked at him, this man who was supposed to be a monster, a Mafia don, a killer, and she saw, in the lines around his eyes and the set of his mouth, a bone-deep weariness, a loneliness. A man surrounded by people who wanted something from him, who smiled at him while planning his death. A man who had learned, like she had, to read the truth in the spaces between words. "Check her jaw," Elena said, the words rushing out before she could stop them. "Under her left ear. There's a note. I hid it there. Read it, and then find me. I have proof." His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "Proof of what?" "Of the poison," Elena said. "Of Marco. Of everything." For a long moment, he just looked at her. The silence stretched, heavy and electric, and Elena could feel her pulse in every part of her body. Then he nodded, a single, sharp movement. "Wait in the library," he said. "Third door on the left. Don't speak to anyone. Don't leave. If anyone tries to stop you, tell them you're under my protection." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy ring, pressing it into her palm. "Show them this. They'll understand." Elena looked down at the ring, gold, with the Bianchi crest etched into the surface, and then back up at him. "Why are you trusting me? You don't know me." "I could be lying. I could be part of it." "You could be," he agreed. "But you're not. I know a liar when I see one, Miss Rossi. And you, despite your best efforts, are not a liar. You're just a woman who heard something she shouldn't have and decided to do the right thing anyway." He paused. "That's rare too." He turned and walked away, his footsteps silent on the marble, and Elena stood there clutching the ring and trying to remember how to breathe. The library was a vast, dim room, lined with books that smelled of old paper and dust and secrets. Elena sat in a leather armchair near the window, the ring heavy in her pocket, and waited. Outside, the wedding preparations continued. She could hear the string quartet tuning up, the murmur of arriving guests, the occasional burst of laughter. It all felt surreal, a party happening on the deck of a sinking ship. She pulled out her phone and checked the recording. It was still there, the file saved and time-stamped. She played a few seconds of it, just to be sure, and Alessia's cold, laughing voice filled the quiet room. "The poison is already in the house." She stopped it quickly, her stomach churning. Time passed. She didn't know how much. The light through the window shifted, the shadows lengthening. She thought about her apartment, her small, safe life, the clients who tipped well, and the ones who didn't, the way she had always kept her head down and her mouth shut, because that was how women like her survived. And now she was sitting in a Mafia Don's library, holding a recording that could bring down an empire, waiting for a man who might already be dead. The door opened. Don Matteo Bianchi walked in, and Elena knew immediately that something had changed. His face was still unreadable, but his posture was different, tighter, more controlled, like a coiled spring. He closed the door behind him and crossed the room to stand before her. "I found the note," he said. "I read it, and I had my men search the kitchen. They found the poison, a vial of tetrodotoxin, hidden in a bottle of champagne that was meant for my table." His voice was calm, too calm, the calm of a man who was holding back a storm. "My brother's men have been detained. Marco himself is currently in a basement room, with several of my less gentle employees. He's been very forthcoming." Elena let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "And Alessia?" "Alessia is still in her bridal suite, still waiting for her perfect wedding. She doesn't know that anything has changed." He looked at her, and there was something new in his expression now, something that made her breath catch. "You saved my life, Miss Rossi. You, a woman I had never met, a woman my fiancé called a nobody. You heard something you weren't supposed to hear, and instead of running, you stayed. You found a way to warn me. You risked everything." "I couldn't just let her kill you," Elena said. "I couldn't live with myself." "Many people could," he said. "Many people would, but not you." He reached out and very gently took her hand. His fingers were warm, calloused, surprisingly gentle for a man who had probably killed people with those same hands. "I want to hear the recording." She pulled out her phone and played it for him. Alessia's voice filled the library. Every cruel, calculating word, every laugh, every detail of the plot. Don Matteo listened in silence, his face utterly still. But Elena could see the muscle in his jaw jumping, the way his fingers tightened around hers. When the recording ended, he was quiet for a long moment. She laughed, he said finally. She laughed about killing me, about poisoning me on our wedding day. I knew she didn't love me. I'm not a fool. But I didn't think she hated me enough to plan my murder with my own brother. I'm sorry, Elena said, and meant it. Don't be sorry. You gave me the truth. That's more than anyone else in this house has given me in years. He released her hand and straightened, and the storm she had sensed in him was closer to the surface now, a dark, controlled fury that made the air in the room feel heavier. The wedding is still happening. The guests are here. The priest is waiting, and Alessia is about to walk down the aisle thinking she's won. You're going to confront her publicly, Elena said, understanding. Yes, I'm going to give her the wedding she deserves. He looked at her, and there was something almost like a smile at the corner of his mouth, a grim, dangerous curve. And I want you there. I want you to see it. You earned that. I'm just the makeup artist, Elena said. No one will even notice me. I'll notice you, he said, and the words landed in her chest like a stone in still water, sending ripples through every part of her. I've already noticed you, Miss Rossi, more than you know. The ceremony was held in the estate's grand ballroom, a vast space transformed into a cathedral of white flowers and candlelight. The guests filled the rows of chairs, a sea of expensive suits and designer dresses. The elite of the city's underworld gathered to witness the union of two powerful families. Elena stood near the back, half hidden behind a pillar, her makeup case still clutched in her hand like a talisman. She had changed into the only other outfit she had with her, a simple black dress that made her look like part of the staff, invisible and unremarkable. But Don Matteo's eyes found her anyway. He was standing at the altar, tall and imposing in his black tuxedo, and as the music swelled and the bride began her procession, his gaze swept the room and landed on her. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just looked at her for a moment, and in that look was something that made her feel, for the first time in her life, seen. Alessia walked down the aisle like a queen entering her kingdom. Her gown was a masterpiece of lace and silk, her veil trailing behind her like a cloud, her face radiant with the makeup Elena had applied. She looked beautiful. She looked triumphant. She looked like a woman who believed she was about to win everything. She reached the altar and took her place beside Don Matteo, and the priest began to speak. The words washed over the room, familiar and solemn, and Elena watched Alessia's face, reading the micro-expressions that flickered beneath her perfect mask. Impatience, satisfaction, a tiny, smug smile that she couldn't quite suppress. She was already counting her victory, already imagining the moment when the poison would take effect, and she would become the grieving widow, rich and powerful and free. And then Don Matteo raised his hand. "Stop," he said. The priest faltered. The guests murmured. Alessia's smile froze on her face. "Matteo?" she said, her voice sweet and confused. "What's wrong?" "What's wrong?" he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "is that I just learned my bride and my brother planned to poison me at my own wedding." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a held breath, of a room full of dangerous people, suddenly realizing that something had gone very, very wrong. Alessia's face went pale, then red, her composure cracking like ice under pressure. "That's insane," she said. "Who told you that? It's a lie. It's your own voice," Don Matteo said, and he pulled out his phone. "Miss Rossi, would you step forward, please?" Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. Every head in the room turned toward her as she stepped out from behind the pillar, her black dress and her curvy figure, and her makeup case, marking her as someone who didn't belong. She walked toward the altar, on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, and she saw Alessia's eyes widen with recognition, then fury. "You," Alessia hissed, "the fat makeup artist. You did this. You—" "Play the recording," Don Matteo said, and Elena pulled out her own phone and pressed play. Alessia's voice filled the ballroom, cold and laughing, and utterly damning. "The poison is already in the house. He's going to die thinking I loved him. The fat cow doesn't know anything. Who would believe her?" The guests listened in stunned silence, their faces a gallery of shock and horror, and, in some cases, grim satisfaction. Alessia stood frozen at the altar, her beautiful face contorted with rage and disbelief. When the recording ended, Don Matteo turned to his bride. "You were right about one thing," he said, his voice quiet and deadly. "I trusted too easily, but I'm learning. And the first thing I've learned is that the woman you called a nobody is worth 100 of you." Alessia lunged. It was a desperate, animal movement, her hands reaching for his throat, her veil tearing, her perfect updo coming undone. But the guards were already there, catching her arms, pulling her back. She screamed, a sound of pure, incandescent fury, and the guests watched as the beautiful bride was dragged from the ballroom, her wedding gown trailing behind her like a shroud. Don Matteo turned to the crowd. "The wedding is canceled. My brother and his co-conspirators are in custody. Anyone who wishes to leave may do so. Anyone who wishes to discuss their continued loyalty to this family may stay." The room erupted into motion, guests rising and murmuring and moving toward the exits. But Elena stood still, her phone clutched in her hand, her whole body shaking with the aftermath of what had just happened. She had done it. She had exposed the plot. She had saved the boss, and now she had no idea what came next. Don Matteo approached her. The crowd parted for him like water around a stone. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell sandalwood and leather, and the faint, sharp scent of his fury. "You're still trembling," he said. "I'm not used to public speaking," she said, and the absurdity of the joke made her lips twitch. He didn't laugh, but something in his eyes softened. "You stood in front of a room full of the most dangerous people in the city, and exposed a murder plot. You, a woman who was supposed to be invisible. You, a woman my bride dismissed as nobody." He reached out, and very gently, touched her cheek. His fingers were warm against her skin. "You are the bravest person I have ever met, Miss Rossi, and I owe you a debt I can never repay." "You don't owe me anything," Elena said. "I just did what was right. That's exactly why I owe you everything." He dropped his hand, but his eyes never left her face. "Stay, please. Not as a guest, not as staff. Stay as someone I want to know, someone I want to protect, someone I want to—" He stopped, as if the word he was looking for was too dangerous to say aloud. "Just stay." Elena looked at him, this man who was supposed to be a monster, and saw instead a man who had been betrayed by everyone he trusted, a man who was tired and lonely, and, despite everything, still capable of gentleness. She thought about her apartment, her small, safe life, the clients who tipped well, and the ones who didn't. She thought about the way he had looked at her, the way he had said, "I'll notice you," the way his fingers had felt against her cheek. "Okay," she said, "I'll stay." And for the first time since she had walked into the Bianchi estate that morning, Elena Rossi felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The days that followed were strange and disorienting, a blur of interrogations and statements, and the quiet, efficient cleanup that followed a failed coup. Marco Bianchi and his co-conspirators were dealt with in ways that Elena didn't ask about and didn't want to know. Alessia was sent away, her family paid off, her name erased from the Bianchi records, as if she had never existed. The wedding flowers wilted and were thrown out, The fairy lights were taken down from the olive trees. The estate returned to its usual pressurized silence. But something had shifted. The tension was still there, but it was a different kind of tension now, expectant rather than fearful. Elena stayed in a guest suite on the second floor, a beautiful room, with a view of the gardens, and a bed so soft she felt like she was sleeping on a cloud. She had never been so comfortable in her life, and she had never been so uneasy. She didn't belong here. She was a makeup artist, a working woman, a nobody, from a neighborhood that didn't appear on any of the Bianchi family's maps. But every time she tried to leave, something stopped her. A guard, with a polite but firm refusal. A message from Don Matteo, asking her to stay just one more day. And, if she was honest with herself, the memory of his hand on her cheek, and the way he had looked at her, like she was something precious. On the third day, he came to her room. She was sitting by the window, reading a book she had found in the library, when the door opened, and he walked in. He wasn't wearing a suit this time, just a simple white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than before. But his gaze was as sharp as ever, and when he saw her, something in his expression eased. "You're still here," he said. "You asked me to stay. I did, but I half expected you to run. Most people would." He crossed the room and sat down in the chair across from her, close enough that their knees almost touched. "I've been thinking about you, Miss Rossi. About what you did. About why you did it. I told you why. You told me you couldn't live with yourself if you let her kill me. But that's not the whole truth, is it?" He leaned forward, his eyes searching her face. "You've been underestimated your whole life. Dismissed. Mocked. Told you don't matter. And when you heard Alessia say those things about you, when you heard her call you a fat cow and a nobody, something in you decided that you weren't going to be invisible anymore. You were going to be seen, even if it killed you." Elena's throat tightened. He had read her so easily, so completely, that she felt stripped bare. "Maybe," she said. "Maybe I was tired of being nobody." "You were never nobody," he said. "You just hadn't met someone who knew how to look." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and steady around hers. "I know how to look, Elena. I've spent my whole life learning to see what others miss, and what I see in you is extraordinary." She looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between his tanned, scarred fingers and her soft, pale ones. "What happens now?" "Now," he said, "I spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of what you did for me, and I spend every day making sure you never feel invisible again." He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so old-fashioned and tender that it made her breath catch. "If you'll let me." Elena looked at him, this dangerous, damaged, unexpectedly gentle man, and felt something shift inside her. It was the weight of years of being overlooked, of shrinking herself, of believing that women like her didn't get to be the heroines of stories like this. And it was the lightness of being seen, truly seen, by someone who understood what it meant to be underestimated. "I'm not going to be your secret," she said. "I'm not going to hide in this room while you go back to your world. If I stay as me. Curvy, outspoken, makeup artist me. I won't shrink for anyone, not even for you." "I don't want you to shrink," he said. "I want you to take up space, all the space you deserve, and I want to be the man who stands beside you while you do it." She smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes and made her cheeks ache. "Then I'll stay." He smiled back, and the expression transformed his face, softening the hard lines and the shadows, making him look younger and lighter, and almost happy. "Good, because I have a feeling, Elena Rossi, that you're the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I'm not going to let you go." Outside the window, The sun was setting over the olive trees, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The estate was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like peace rather than pressure. And Elena, sitting in a beautiful room with her hand in the hand of a man who saw her, felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt like she mattered. It was the beginning of something. She didn't know what shape it would take, what challenges lay ahead, what the world would say about a mafia boss and his curvy makeup artist. But she knew, with a certainty that went deeper than logic, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid to be seen.